So I've mentioned in earlier videos that I'm not someone who's very comfortable around animals. I never have been. I used to have pets when I was a kid. Goldfish, the standard goldfish. Terrapins was the big one for me. I've always been fascinated by anything that can live both on land and in water. Unfortunately for me, 7 or 8 months after getting my terrapins from Clapham Market, I got slightly confused with the species, and I was watching an episode of Blue Peter where they were putting their tortoise, I think his name was George, they were boxing him up for the winter. And I thought, well, this is obviously what I've got to do for the terrapins. So I took my two terrapins out of their tank, stuck them in a matchbox. I think 5, 6 months later, I suddenly remember, the terrapins, open the matchbox. Grim. Grim. I wonder if that, as well as the amount of ants I killed in the late 70s, will go against me when it comes to gaining admission into the afterlife. Anyway, so I've never been very comfortable with animals, in spite of a couple of videos this week in which I've mentioned my troubling relationship with dogs. I'd say I prefer dogs to cats. Cats definitely troubled by their agility. But, like most people, I don't like pests. And having moved around a lot in London after a very stable first half of my life as a private renter. The state of accommodation in London, the chances are you're going to be running into pests sooner rather than later. And this is the story of, you never want a rodent to come into your life, but this particular rodent couldn't have come into my life at a worse point. I lost my parents fairly early. I'm not going to edit that. I don't know what happened there with a fairly. I can't even say it. Anyway, my generation are starting to lose their parents now, or starting to watch them getting, old and, infirm. And in some, there are moments where I think I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. The downside of it was to lose my parents abruptly was very difficult, and certainly I think that the loss of my mum is probably something I never really came back from. I think it was, just very difficult to deal with. So it was around this time. I remembered everything about the day, except there was a half hour of missing time where I couldn't really remember much. But anyway, the week itself was a nightmare. I mean, the first 2 years, I think someone had said to me, friend had said to me at the funeral, the first 2 years are the worst. And I thought, well, this is a inappropriate time to say this, but it was actually the best advice I ever had in terms of the grieving process. It was a very good assessment, and that whole week obviously was awful. My dad had always, he'd always felt I was too close to my mum, which I suppose I was. Spanish kid, firstborn, always favoured. Parents' marriage broke up, so I was very close to my mum, close enough to have decided against going to university. Really, I didn't want to leave my mum on her own, and I can only use that as part of my reason for not going. The other reason being it's highly unlikely I would have got my degree. I was not, I still regard myself as someone who's self-taught. I've always had a problem, whether it's 9 to 5 or education. I struggle to be somewhere for a set amount of hours every day unless it's something I want to do. So that week was very difficult. My dad, I think, possibly too early, he should have given me some time, saw it as an opportunity to finally make a man of me. And at some other point, I'll tell the story of November '89 when, much to his disappointment, I managed to get out of doing my Spanish national service. There was also the man weekend of the summer of '89 when I made the mistake of not going to Spain with my mum and my sister. And only when they were gone did I realise what the implications were for me. I managed to avoid my dad for a couple of weeks, and then the last weekend he got hold of me, and those 48 hours have to be among the most. It's possibly the longest weekend of my life. I was taught how to do everything. It was, even though I had some basic DIY skills, but it was like, okay, we're going to teach you how to hammer a nail into a block of wood. We're going to teach you how to make a bed. We're going to teach you how to, wash clothes. It was everything. It was dull. It was full of arguments. And on the Sunday evening, I remember we actually ended up locked out of the bedsit. He blamed me for that, of course. So anyway, I think he saw this when my mum passed away. Right away, he saw it as an opportunity to step in. I was his responsibility now. Here was this mollycoddled young man with an overly sculpted goatee and long hair. The overly sculpted goatee that I sported at my mum's funeral is a source of regret. I have to say, we took issue on the day of the funeral, or rather he took issue with some white piping on a black coat I wore. So the funeral was on a Friday. On the Saturday morning, a knock on the door. I don't think I was actually sleeping at the bedsit by then. Actually, I should add here, this is a very, very important part of the story. After my parents broke up, my dad, rather than moving away, eventually moved downstairs, and he became our very annoying neighbour. He just existed in the communal hallways. He had two rooms on the first floor, well, one on the first floor, one on the second floor. They weren't connected, and he would never close the doors to his room. We had communal loo, which was always very difficult, and this is what made bringing girls back extremely difficult. And the girlfriend I had at the time, when she first visited, I remember drawing her a little map explaining to her how to get down to the loo. The first of my dad's rooms was next to the communal toilet, and he hadn't. I should have gone with loo there. Why did I say toilet? It's such a coarse word. So my dad never used to shut his doors, particularly in the summer. And obviously, not obviously, also he was someone very comfortable with his body. And as soon as the warm weather was around, he would not wear much in the way of clothing. It's still, it can unsettle me when I think of how many old friends would have seen my dad in minimal clothing. Might they be having flashbacks to that? My mum would always say to him, "You're not wearing enough. He's got his friends around. Wear more." Anyway, the ex-girlfriend went down trying to find the communal toilet. I could have gone down and shown her, but, what kind of conversation would we have had going down the stairs? We weren't ready for that. We weren't comfortable. Best to just send her down there and hope for the best, hope she could find her way back. She went through the wrong door. She ended up in my dad's kitchen, and he was painting in his underwear, in his pants. For any American viewers, pants meaning briefs. So although we broke up about 6-7 months later, I have to say, if we'd stayed together, I don't think there would have been another woman out there who'd have met her potential father-in-law in the same way. What could I say when she came back and told me what had happened, other than I wasn't surprised? Nothing surprised me about my dad. So the week after, sorry, the week of my mum's funeral, I wasn't actually staying in the bedsit. I found it very difficult to stay there, and my sister was staying there. She'd come back. I don't know if she was in Italy at the time. She'd come back. She was staying there, which I thought was very courageous, because it is very difficult to be somewhere where you've got all those memories and suddenly someone who's such a big part of that place isn't coming back. It's an awful thing, and I think I took the cowardly way out. And by the Saturday morning, I still hadn't slept there, but That's right. I remember actually. I went back to North London on the Friday after the funeral. Got back there on the Saturday morning, knock on the door as soon as I get there, and the door handle was rattled. That was my dad's MO. He was like, he was like Kramer in Seinfeld. He was that kind of neighbour. He was just always at your door. And suddenly he announced he was taking me to Iceland to do some shopping, like I'd never shopped before. You know, by this stage, I should add, my plan was simply to live on pasta for the rest of my life. I do think Italian food is overrated. It's very simple. It's very easy to you just boil it, you stick it in a pan. I would have been fine with that for the rest of my life. At the time, I was doing a bit of Nando's too. Their portions were bigger back in those days. I'm going back 20 years. Nando's had come into this country, I think, in the late 90s. I was impressed with their portions. As soon as those portions shrunk, that was me done with Nando's. So we went to Iceland. I thought, okay, I've got to be careful here. I'll just entertain him here and just try and end this as soon as possible. Got back. He came back into the bedsit, which was a big step in itself. In that, when my mum was still around, she banned him from coming in. I mean, which fair play. She was well within her rights, and also he was one of those visitors who would never know when to leave. He was a raconteur. He loved talking. He really did love talking. So I remember I bought some chicken drumsticks, and I'd lived away from home for 6 months, not successfully the year before, but I'd learned how to do chicken drumsticks during that period. Stick them in the oven, dice some onions and whatever. But he decided he was going to show me how to do chicken drumsticks. I did not know how to do chicken drumsticks. So, it was like, okay, so you got to cut into the chicken skin, make a few cuts into the chicken skin very quickly. He was adamant I wasn't gripping the knife properly. His hand came over my hand. I could feel him getting frustrated, tightening his hold on my wrist. And I just thought, I can't do this. This is not going to work out. I may not be the kind of man you want me to be, but I'm fine with the kind of man I am for now. I need to grieve. I'm not really worried about learning how to make chicken. Okay, let's just try and get through this. So that was the Saturday. Now I think I went back to North London that day. But by the Sunday, I was feeling, really guilty. I just thought it's not fair on my sister. She's staying there on her own. I've got to come back. I've got to spend the night there. Bring some life back into the bedsit at what is a very difficult time. So, I came back. I made my Z bed, and my sister would leave again. She would return shortly, I think, to Italy, if it was Italy she was in. And so I spent the next, my final 5-6 months there, sleeping with the light on every night. Really, sleeping with the light on every night. I just did not like being there on my own. And obviously, you're sleeping with the light on, it becomes very difficult to sleep. The ex-girlfriend stayed there for a couple of months, but that was it. As soon as she went, the light always stayed on. So I'm there on the Sunday night in my Z bed. I think I'm watching Match of the Day. Was I? No, Match of the that's an incorrect recollection. I hold my hand up here. Match of the Day 2 didn't start for another 4 years. Maybe I taped the football from the Saturday and I was watching it as a recording. I think I was watching football though. I'm on the Z bed, propped up on my pillows, watching the television. Out of the corner of my right eye, I see like a little shadow across the going across the settee. Then I see this shadow jump down. I'm like, what is that? And then I look under the Z bed and I see a mouse running under the Z bed all the way back into this fireplace that we had, which I think by then had, again, for the umpteenth time, been disconnected by British Gas. And the way that would work is our old Polish landlord would just come back the following day and take off the do not use British Gas sticker sign and just tell us, hey, it's fine to use. The mouse disappeared through this little hole. I was just stunned. I just thought, not now, not of all the things that could happen now. Of all the things that I don't need right now is a mouse. I cannot deal with a mouse. I was stunned. I got up, I walked over to the fireplace. I think I remember stuffing some tissue into the hole. I did not sleep at all that night. And then the following day, I was like, okay, how am I going to deal with this? Now, the previous year, I'd been living in Streatham for 6 months. It was the only time I've had access to a ground floor. There were four of us. We had the whole house, and there was a garden. I've never needed a garden. I think I went out into the garden once, but the problem with the garden was when we moved in, it was overgrown. So we had several incidents with rodents. But the interesting thing is that introduced me to humane mouse traps. And there were three guys living with one girl. The girl was the one who would get rid of the rodent in the morning. The guys, we didn't want anything to do with the rodent, Spanish, mummy's boys. Um, but I thought, okay, I know where I can get some humane mouse traps. Those little black tubes, like on a ramp, I think. So the mouse climbs in, and then the weight pushes it down, and it closes at the other end. I don't know if I've explained that properly, but I went down to a hardware shop in Victoria with my old friend Match, sadly no longer with us. Got a couple of those. And I just thought, I'm not sure this is going to be enough. I think I'm going to have to speak to my dad. I knew if I spoke to my dad about it, it's kind of bringing him back in. It's shown him within 3 days of the funeral that I am not going to be able to cope with things without calling him in. And of course, he was in his element. He kind of went into A-team mode. He had some netting that he used to have when he used to keep birds. He was a big. He was very much into his ornithology. Used to have an aviary in the bedsit. He got some drinking glasses, got a hammer, stuck the glasses under a cloth, hammered them to break the glass into tiny little pieces. Got some cement, mixed it all up. And made sure Lopez and I were there watching. So Lopez also, I think, certainly in my dad's books, was somewhat short in the manly department. So we had to watch him doing this, and I think he relished the moment. I think it was important to him as well because it had hurt him. My mum's passing. It was important to him to know that he was going to be of some use, that he was going to play some role in our lives to get through what was easily the hardest period in my life. And my attempts at doing it my own way very, very quickly, within 72 hours, it was just up in the air. I just felt it's a sign of weakness here, but it just came back to not being able to deal with rodents in terms of a cast change. To think that just 9 days previously, my mum had been sat on that settee, that she had lived there for 24 years. She's gone. 9 days later, she's replaced by a mouse. That really did mess my head. And to be fair to my dad, he was around for another sort of 2.5 years, and he came good for me. I definitely wouldn't have pulled through that period of my life without him, and it started with the mouse.